We are on air.
Okay, great, thanks. So I will call to order our work session for April 6th and point out that at the end of the work session, Council will go into an executive session for deliberation with persons designated by the governing body to carry on labor negotiations. But I will read that whole paragraph at the end if somebody helps me remember. All right, so our first item up is the comprehensive plan implementation project, and this will be presented by Mayor Colias.
Hello, Mayor, councilors. Thank you very much for, again, having me come and letting me talk to you about the project. Appreciate the opportunity to provide an update on where we are with the comprehensive plan implementation, phase 1. I'm going to share my screen. And then again, ask and make sure folks can see a presentation. And I hope you can.
Yep.
Yep, great, thank you. Okay. Let me just get it into full screen mode. Okay. Couple of things just to orient folks. Again, with our project schedule, with this project, we are kind of in the middle or a little bit more than halfway through with our final code adoption slated to happen sometime this summer. We're in the community review and testing phase of our code concepts and trying to suss out and kind of finalize the direction of some of our kind of key questions for the code amendments. Again, we have a couple of policy mandates from the comprehensive plan for this project. We are charged with increasing the supply of middle housing and providing housing choice throughout the city, increasing the tree canopy and preserving existing trees throughout the city, and to manage parking and enable middle housing and protect trees. So again, this is the housing, trees, and parking phase of the code amendments. We talked about this a little bit before, but some key ideas for this package of code amendments is a livability code as it relates to adding housing throughout the city, talking about intentionally designing housing to provide more housing choice throughout the city, to maximize trees on private property, minimize on-site pavement to the extent that we can, or impervious surfaces, and to focus on the form of the housing, not necessarily the zone. And that's going to come up in a little bit in conversation as part of this presentation. Some of the types of code amendments that we're talking about include simplifying the number of zones, and I have a couple of slides that chat about that. And our in the staff report had some additional information about that particular item. Adopt a form-based approach to the code amendments rather than relying on the zones where the housing is happening. Let's talk about the form of the housing, or the actual built piece of the housing. Amending on-site parking requirements to better match the housing that we're proposing, and establish a pattern guide or a menu for standards so we can maintain a clear and objective review process for housing, but also to still provide some flexibility or a menu of options within that clear and objective approach, and to adopt a tree code for residential property. Again, we don't have a tree code that applies to private residential property unless it's in a mapped natural resource area. The tree code that we do have applies to public property, street trees, public parks, public land. So a new tree code that applies to residential property, both as part of development projects, but also non-development projects, is part of the charge of this project. So part of let me back up a little bit. The foundation for this project, again, is implementation of the comprehensive plan, goals and policies as it relates to housing. And so that's the foundation, and that's all of our amendments and all of our discussions and so on kind of check back to the various comprehensive plan policies that relate to expanding housing choice throughout the city. We're also sort of checking in with our progress against House Bill 2001 to make sure that we are staying in compliance with House Bill 2001. I like to think of House Bill 2001 as kind of the math that goes with the comprehensive plan policies that we are charged with implementing. So this is not a package of code amendments that are focused on House Bill 2001. It's just a way to double check and make sure that we're hitting the math as far as the minimum lot sizes and that sort of thing to make sure that we're staying in compliance with the House bill. But ultimately, the comprehensive plan policies are what is informing and what we're always looking back to as part of this package of amendments. What the map here that you see are the areas that are affected by House Bill 2001, and what these are all of our zones that allow single-family homes or single-unit dwellings. So essentially, these are all of our residential zones because all of our residential zones allow single-unit dwellings. So as part of the House bill requirement, middle housing must be permitted in zones where single unit homes are permitted. So just wanted to give you sort of a map so you can sort of see the majority of our city is zoned for residential uses. As part of the House bill, duplexes must be permitted on all lots. And other middle housing types, such as triplexes or quadplexes, are permitted based on a minimum lot size, not the zone that they're found in. So lot size is what governs the other middle housing types. And for as an example, triplexes on lots that are 5,000 square feet and quadplexes on lots that are 7,000 square feet as examples. So that sort of informs part of this conversation. Oh, sorry, Councillor Falconer, I see that you've raised your hand. May I answer a question for you?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure. I sent you a note after, when this was originally slated to come before us about that point. And I was just wondering if we'll get into detail about that. And if the consultants addressed the issues about, the rules around requiring that triplexes and quadplexes and townhouses and cottage clusters, there's actually a percentage of lots and parcels that they must be allowed on.
Yes.
And so I don't know if you're going to get into that detail or if now is, or let me know if that's an appropriate conversation for today, or if we want to hold off, that's fine. I just want to make sure that we are thinking about that.
Right. So I wasn't going to get into that detail. However, what we've been talking about, at least sort of as we've been approaching all of this, is you're right that there are sort of this minimum percentages of lots of certain sizes where these middle housing types need to be permitted. We are sort of, rather than going kind of by the areas, we've been talking about this as being on using a minimum lot size way of understanding this, as opposed to kind of trying to identify areas and making sure that we're hitting those percentages. But we can talk about that a little bit more. Maybe not tonight, maybe at the next update, the next work session, if that's okay. It's a good question. And yes, we've talked about it, but let me address that at the next work session, if that's okay, in more detail, and I'll have more visuals that will and more calculations that can talk about sort of the back and forth, if that's all right.
That's great, thanks. And I'll just go ahead and, just so that the counselors know what I'm talking about, I'll go ahead and just copy and paste the rule that I'm talking about so that folks kind of know where my question is.
Great. Okay. So one of the things that we've been talking about, and quite a bit of the staff report and sort of part of this discussion is some of the discussion that we had at our last CPIC meeting, or the committee meeting on March 18th, where we talked about a number of these items, including the consolidation of the residential zones. That was a question that we talked about. And so some of these maps come from that presentation. And so this idea of simplifying the number of residential zones is something that we talked about in quite a bit of detail with the committee. And again, we have 8 residential zones right now. So what we've been talking about is this notion of consolidating the 8 zones in this map that you can see, consolidating them, those 8 into 3. And so what you see here in the purple are the R5 and R7 zones glued together into one zone. The yellow is the R10 zone, kind of standing off by itself. And then the orange are the high density zones. So the R1B, R1, R2, R2.5, and R3 zones are in the orange. There was there has been general consensus from the committee that a consolidation is something that the committee supports, but there was some uncertainty about the R10 zone. So that's why we've culled it out a little bit separately as part of some additional conversations that we've been having. Councillor Beatty, I see that you've raised your hand.
Yeah.
Answer a question.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
I sit with the CPIC, and we talked about this, but and I was one of the people who said need more information, which was one of the one of the answers when people were surveyed. But I've been thinking about it more, and I just want to make sure I understand it more. So right now I'm not focusing on the smaller zones, what you have in orange. I'm just thinking about the R5, R7, R10. And I will tell council there's a map coming, I think, that shows that like some of our larger lots are not actually in the R10. So, I mean, that's also a point to keep in mind. But if we consolidate, either, two of the three or all three, that means what does that mean for minimum lot size? That's not something that we've discussed at all in CPIC. And so does that mean every lot can go down to 1 point, it can be divided as low as 1 point, or 1,500 square feet, because that's the size for a townhome? Or does it mean they all base out at 5,000 square feet? Or what exactly does it mean if they're consolidated? What does it mean for what the sort of default lot size that people could subdivide into is?
It's a good question. We haven't talked about that as a, kind of as a committee or with the consultant yet. I think what I might offer is, minimum lot size depends on, what type of housing you want to build, right? So if a single unit home needs to be on a 5,000 square foot lot, then that's the minimum lot size for a single unit home. If a triplex needs to be on 5,000 square feet, similarly. So in some ways, because the lot size is about the housing type, and I'm just sort of thinking about this out loud, with us as a group, to what extent does the minimum lot size matter? I mean, a townhome can be on a 1,500 square foot, lot. So you could sort of do that. Even if the minimum lot size in this consolidated zone was 5,000 square feet, we still need to allow, the townhomes as well. So it's a good question. I think sort of how we treat that within the code is something that we'll work through as we get to the language itself. But because the lot size is tied directly to sort of the housing type, then it's definitely turning our code, kind of on its head a little bit than as what we have right now, because we do have these but minimum lot sizes are tied to the housing type. It's not for the zone itself. So I think we're going to have a variety of lot sizes in any of these zones, depending on the housing type that someone's looking to construct.
Okay.
So,
and let me ask the inverse question, what seems to me the inverse question, which is, one of the concerns I've had, and I think a lot of people, if they, were focusing on the large lots, would have, is how enormous a building could be. If we let it be built into what Marcy McAnally likes to call the Jello mold, which means just built out to the setbacks and built out to the maximum amount of lot coverage, and you're talking about a 10 or a 14,000 square foot lot, it could be enormous, and it could be outside, any reasonable proportion of anything around it. So could we establish a maximum lot size if we eradicate the zones and we're, if we merge the three zones? Could we establish a maximum lot size for a structure?
How would we do that if people own a 2-acre lot in the middle of Milwaukee? How do we all of a sudden say, nope, you have to break that up into 6 lots?
Well, I don't know that we'd make them break it up, but we'd set a maximum size in which the envelope of the structure could be.
So a maximum envelope size, more than a maximum lot size.
Right.
Yeah. But that would then preclude buildings, building apartment buildings where it might be entirely appropriate to build an apartment building. So that.
Are you just talking in the single family or single dwelling zone?
Yeah, I'm talking not in the orange zone. So in the things that are orange on the map, apartment buildings can be built. In the rest of it, apartment buildings can't be built.
Yeah, and I guess I'm suggesting that there are places even in those areas where it would be appropriate to put an apartment building.
Well, that's a big different question than what's been posed or what's been proposed or spoken about on the CPIC.
So,
yeah, if I could just jump in on that to Councillor Falconer's point, we have not talked about introducing what we're calling multifamily, so anything beyond a quadplex, introducing them into zones where they're currently not permitted. So we're dealing with the middle housing types, as defined, and distributing, and talking about them throughout the city. We haven't talked about adding what we've been currently calling multifamily housing or multi-unit sorts of developments, introducing those into these zones. So just wanted to clarify that.
Even in the neighborhood nodes?
So we're not, where currently multifamily development is allowed, which are high density, zones that you see here in orange, that's where they are permitted now. That's where they, would be permitted. So apartments and that kind of thing. So we are not touching the NMU, the neighborhood mixed use zones. For example, that's the mixed use zones or the general mixed use zones. Those are not part of this code amendment package. We are only addressing our residential zones as part of this code amendment package. So the hubs, the neighborhood hubs and that sort of thing would be a subsequent phase of work. So we're not, and so things may change once we start talking about those, but we're only talking about our residential zones as part of this project. Yeah.
I have a question too in this realm, and I'm sorry, apparently as a co-host, you don't get a hand to raise. Were we not, I'm remembering the comprehensive plan being pretty specific about causing lot sizes to be more flexible, avoiding the sort of minimum lot size concept so that when a development occurs and there are trees, we're not forced to cut down all the trees just to break up the lot sizes evenly and place houses with setbacks and blah, blah, blah. Did that not enter into this conversation?
So the way I will answer that question is in that we're addressing lot sizes based on the housing type that's being proposed, as well as with the tree code. So we will have requirements for tree preservation, tree plantings, and the flexibility comes into play to some degree in how we are approaching our design standards or and development standards. So setbacks, parking, those are reasons why some of the questions that we've been asking folks, both within the CPIC and as part of our surveys, is how much flexibility or what's important to you when it comes to what's happening on the property if there are trees, as part of that preservation piece. I see where you're getting though, this idea of a subdivision, for example, and minimum lot sizes, can we be flexible and do they have to be 5,000 square feet? Can they be a combination or an average or something? I'm just sort of thinking out loud about how to, so that it's simpler or easier to get around the trees that might be necessary. So right now, we've been using the housing type to guide the lot size in a combination of design and development standards, and then the tree code, and sort of layering all of those things on top of it. But I think to your question, Mr. Mayor, I think that's something that we should probably test out and see what that would look like on sort of an example kind of property, even just kind of back of house sort of thinking about, is there a way to think about that so that we don't end up pigeonholing or sort of forcing a developer into a particular, lane, and end up with a situation like we found in the past where there just was nowhere to go in terms of that. It's a good question. And I think we just need to test it, I think, on a site and see, is there a way to do that, to introduce that idea? Yep.
Okay, good, because I'm pretty sure that the comp plan calls for some flexibility.
Yep. Okay. Good. Okay.
So I had, another question in this realm. What was the argument for not combining R5, R7, and R10?
So I'm about to get to that, if that's okay, because the outlier so this initial map reflects that there were some questions from CPIC members from the prior meeting or prior discussions about wanting a little more information about R10. R10 was sort of set aside out of the consolidation until we looked at it a little bit more. And so this was sort of the resultant map if you ended up with 3 residential zones, with R10 being its own zone. And then as Councillor Beatty talked about sort of the idea of, well, then we wanted to take a kind of a deeper dive into R10 and what is so special about R10 and why, what makes sense about R10 to be its own zone. And part of it was this notion, of course, that, that's where the larger lots are. R10 having a minimum lot size of 10,000 square feet. Let's talk about that. But what the mapping revealed is that 80% of the large lots in the city, and by that I mean over 10,000 square feet, are actually outside of the R10 zone. So the bulk of them are everywhere else and not even in the R10. So part of this question, the question we wanted to ask was, does it still make sense to keep R10 by itself if most of those large lots aren't in the R10? Is there value here? What are we gaining by doing that? So what you can see here is in the sort of cross-hatched on the map are the actual mapped R10 zones. And then the yellow lots or the yellowish tan lots are 10,000 to 14,000 square feet. And then the pink lots are over 14,000 square feet. So the vast majority, as I said, 80% of the large lots are outside of the R10 zone. So, so these would be in that R5, R7 combo area.
And there's a fair amount of those that are less than their minimum lot size, if I'm recalling the Lake Road neighborhood correctly.
Right.
There's a whole lot
of crosshatched here that is not pink or yellow. So that's
correct. That's correct. Yes.
That's interesting how, half of the R10 in that area is not really the minimum lot size. What's really stunning to me is that stretch along 32nd on both sides of 30, or is that between 32nd and the railroad?
Do you mean here?
Yeah.
The Ardenwald.
Those lots in Ardenwald. I mean, there's a few along 32nd that you notice, but that's not right to me that there's that many big lots in Ardenwald. Is that really true?
It is true. And I actually did some additional mapping here on all of these lots as a way of sort of trying to suss out the potential for flag lots as another question to be asked for us, given that our flag lot standards have changed so much. And this is sort of kind of another question, something that we're going to be chatting with you folks actually at the next meeting. I've already been drafting the staff report. So here's a little preview because these lots are old subdivision lots put together in the 30s. And they are, for the most part, right around 72 feet wide and 240 feet deep. So they're skinny and really deep. And so over the years, kind of pre-1998, you'll see a series of flag lots on some of these streets because we were allowing flag poles to be as narrow as 15 feet wide. So you could fit that driveway and put the house in the back. But over the years since then, we've increased our standards for flag lots. So we've made the pole now has to be 25 feet wide. We've increased kind of the way we measure the minimum lot size for the flag lot itself. The setbacks have been increased for the house on the flag lot. So overall, we've made it more difficult to partition for flag lots. And so what you're seeing here in that Ardenwald area of those narrow and deep lots are lots that would need an entire suite of variances in order to partition for flag lots. And so I'm sort of giving away my next staff report for you folks, but that's part of the question. One of these key questions that I think is important to ask is sort of what sort of room do we want to provide in order to create more flag lot opportunities, as an example, because we have, a whole package of lots that are kind of, that's what they want to be in that respect because of their narrowness. But it's a question that we think is important to answer about how those would develop.
Is there any, and I'm sure the answer is, it depends. I'm sure the answer is it varies, but can we think about ways other than flag lots, such as alleys?
Yes.
And cross connections to develop those lots, I guess, would be something I would want to think about. I do know it was before my time on the Planning Commission, which started in late 2004, I think. But I know in the late 90s, early 2000s, flag lots were a huge, huge controversial thing in Milwaukee. And there's a reason why the code became more strict in the late 90s, because people were really unhappy with what was going on with some flag lots.
Yeah, no, it's a fair question, and your idea of sort of thinking about what other potential is there, and the idea of alleys running along the back, to connect kind of from that respect, is certainly makes sense kind of on paper. It's a matter of sort of connecting all of those lots, right, and creating that alley across what could be 10 lots, 5 on each side or something like that. So it requires more coordination between multiple property owners in order to do something like that. But alley loading kind of in the back, like you see, undeveloped alleyways, in Southeast Portland, that connects the back of properties, would open up a lot of potential in a very different way. And you'd, be breaking up sort of the travel for vehicles and access to those lots too. So yes, so it's just, but that when you see those skinny long lots, there are a lot of questions about what that development potential is for sure.
Well, and looking at the map, there are a number of blocks over there where you couldn't do an alley because the existing structures are so all over the place on the lots themselves. So it will take more than one creative solution for the whole problem.
Yeah. Yep. It's an interesting challenge to think about for sure. Yeah. So when we talked about this sort of idea with CPIC and trying to understand what folks thought, a majority of committee members supported consolidation and including R10 back in, but it wasn't a runaway majority. So there's still some discussion to be had, I think, with what happens here. And part of this present, I just kind of want to lay out sort of some of the if R10 remains on its own, then, with a 10,000 square foot lot, you'd have, one lot that could have a single dwelling, a duplex, ADU, triplex, quadplex, cottage cluster of townhouses, sort of that's where you are. But if it were kind of consolidated in with the R5, R7, then it could be divided. And then, so there's more, so part of this discussion is this idea of, in some ways, better responding to our comp plan policies of providing more opportunities, for housing. So to be able to provide the opportunity to divide that 10,000 square foot lot to do things. It's a policy. It's a question that we're all answering in our own way. And so that's kind of part of what this discussion is with CPIC, is this idea of what happens with those, with R10. But given the preponderance of large lots outside of R10, we're trying to understand if that makes sense. Is there a different way to get to this question, as opposed as rather than the zone as the answer, I guess. And then we did talk to some degree about the high density zone. So again, these areas on the map that you see shaded are our higher density zones. And some of the questions, I think we did have a runaway majority of 91% when polled with our CPIC thought, yes, we should consolidate these zones. Couple of things to think about here are some of our high density zones also allow some commercial uses as a conditional use, like offices, for example. So it's a matter of structuring that consolidation, figuring out a way to still allow for some of those commercial uses. Do they make sense in all of those high densities? They're allowed in the R1, R1B. Should they also be allowed in R3? So there's just a couple of sort of anomalies within the individual high density zones to figure out what do we do with those when we, if we were to consolidate them. And so there's some of those sort of details to work through there as well, and figure that out. And then some of the kind of higher level sort of policy questions regarding the high density zones. One of the questions is, should triplexes be permitted on lots smaller than 5,000 square feet, in these higher density zones? Kind of working through thinking about where they are. They tend to be clustered around kind of commercial nodes like the downtown, like the King Road, NMU area. Is there some opportunity to think about higher density, additional higher density there, and sort of reducing the minimum lot size for some of these middle housing types? So those were some of the questions that we have been talking about with CPIC. And no clear answer there, but it's one of those ways that to go sort of beyond the minimum compliance of House Bill 2001 and, maybe think about adding some more housing opportunity within these higher density zones. So that's a question that we're working through as well. And I think, so some of the next steps that we're working on, our next CPIC meeting is on the 15th of April. So we've had a couple of meetings even today, it's just structuring that agenda and structuring the packet. We'll be talking about the parking study. Rick Williams will be at the meeting to talk about the residential parking study, the findings, and what those findings mean as it relates to the code amendments. Todd Prager, who's our arborist and our consulting arborist, working on the tree code. So there will be discussion about the tree code outline and kind of what the tree code will contain. Some initial code recommendations and some other conversations about some of the questions that have come up at past CPIC meetings. The consultants and then with staff are working on what we're calling the synthesis report, sort of the refined code concepts, recommendations, a synthesis of all of this information. And then we'll be scheduling technical meetings with staff to work through those, including the city attorney, city engineer, working through kind of what these code recommendations mean in other arenas to make sure that we're all coordinated in our conversations. We'll be analyzing the outreach results, which gets me to my next slide, which is the Engage Milwaukee open house, virtual open house and survey. We've extended the deadline for another week to give people more time. But it looks like the weather's going to be really nice for the next week. So we're not really buying ourselves a rainy day for folks to do the virtual open house, but hopefully they will. So if folks who might be watching on the Engage Milwaukee website, the virtual open house has a number of stations. There's videos, narrative, pictures, all kinds of things to read through about the stations. There is a very extensive comment and conversation happening on a variety of those on each of the open house stations. So I recommend folks take a look at it and engage on that as well. It's been really terrific reading the conversations and the dialogue that folks have had, as well as the survey itself that's at the end. And Councillor Beatty asked if I could send out a document that has the survey questions for council, and I'm happy to do that. So I actually will have that in a PDF form, and I can send those questions to you if sort of taking the survey as decision makers doesn't sit quite right, perfectly understandable. I can send you the question so you know what we're talking about and sort of what we're asking folks. And just letting everyone know that the survey itself and all the open house materials are available in English and in Spanish, also available in hard copy. So if folks don't want to or just don't feel great about being online anymore or don't have that capability, that's fine. We can certainly make those materials available for folks as well in hard copy too. So kind of a lot happening. But again, the deadline's been extended by a week. So hopefully that gives people more time and we'll get some more engagement as part of the open house and the survey. So that concludes the presentation. I'm happy to answer any other questions or
So if people want a hard copy, how do they get that?
They just contact me and I will get that out to them. Yep.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And when I say the hard copy, sorry, the hard copy is in English and in Spanish, and it's all the open house stations and the survey. So the entire thing, that what you would see online is all available in hard copy as well. Yeah.
Great. I will say, yeah, I found the conversations online interesting. And in fact, the question I asked you about sort of the, maximum lot size or maximum development size of the larger lots came out of some of those comments there. I saw somebody who commented of, suggesting making plexes have a, 12 or 1,300 foot maximum size so that you don't get, 20,000 square foot quadplexes kind of thing. I think there's been some really interesting commentary in those. So I hope people keep filling it out, keep commenting.
Anybody else have any questions or comments?
I did, it's sort of ancillary, but I know that the city of Portland pursued having a maximum square footage for single dwelling residences. And I don't know how that has gone. I don't know if it's been implemented or if they've had some challenges to that. And I would love to know that and have that be a part of this conversation as well, because it's certainly part of the form-based code concept overall.
I will research that and get that answer for you.
All righty. Thanks, Vera.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks for your time. Really appreciate it.
Our next item will be risk management training with Bonnie Dennis.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm actually going to introduce to you Jeff Sinclair. Jeff is with Brown & Brown Northwest. He is our agent of record, and he is our guru on everything risk management related. So I'm going to turn it over to Jeff.
Thank you, Bonnie. Thanks for having me, everybody. My name is Jeff Sinclair, and I work for Brown & Brown Northwest. And today I'm going to talk to you about some ideas and issues involving board responsibilities and how your insurance coverage applies to that and how it doesn't apply to that. So I'm going to share my screen. Let us make this work. Can everybody see my screen there? Yes, no? Thumbs up? All right. Yes. Thank you. So I want to talk to you about, the idea of this discussion really has to do with Anne and Bonnie and I talk a lot about just different training opportunities and things we can do for the city in general. And before I became an insurance agent a number of years ago, I was a claims and risk person, but I really did litigation and claims management a lot. And so I've seen a lot of different board members, council members, county commissioners, you name it, people in your position who don't understand sometimes their roles and responsibilities, but more importantly, how the insurance and how the statutes apply to those liabilities and those things. And in today's world, it's really easy to blend those and bleed those lines. And so today, what I'm hoping to do is just give you a short synopsis of what that is and talk about that, answer any questions you have, and then you're on your way. So let's start. So first of all, Brown & Brown Northwest, I work for the organization that is an insurance agency. So we help you with placement of your insurance trainings, claims advocacy when things go wrong, risk management, all those different things. City-county insurance is the risk pool that provides you the actual coverage. So you're actually buying insurance from city-county insurance, CCIS or CIS they call it. They are not an insurance company, however. They're a risk pool that's made up of other cities and counties just within the state of Oregon. So the people on the city-county trust or the board are members just like yourselves. They're actually counselors and commissioners that are just like yourselves that manage that. So it's kind of an in-house thing. It's a pool, but it's very well done. So you're in a very good spot. Does anybody know what ORA 30.260, the Oregon Tort Claims Act? Have you ever heard of that before? If you haven't heard of the Oregon Tort Claims Act, it's going to be a little dry, but please, as a city councilor, board member, school board member, anything you might be doing that's of a public agency type, you need to know what this says. And what this does is it basically outlines all the different responsibilities and requirements that a public entity has, such as they shall indemnify and defend the person, employee, board member, whatever it would be, if they're in the course and scope of their duties under the direction and control of that organization. And you're going to hear me say course and scope and direction and control a lot today because that really matters. And he talks about limits and other things like that, but really the idea of it is, okay, first of all, what is a tort? Okay, a tort, there's no E, it's not a chocolate dessert. A tort is a duty owed, a breach of that duty, and then damages that are associated with that. So think of it like if you have a trip and fall accident walking into, Fred Meyer's, you trip on a mat. Well, they had a duty to make sure it's safe. They failed to do that duty, and you hurt your leg and you required some medical attention. That would be a tort going for that in that situation. It also describes in the act who is covered, such as I mentioned, employees, volunteers, agents, such as, like the person who might fill up your Coke machine or, someone who might work on your HVAC type of things necessarily if they're there. And it limits the damages. For example, you're allowed to sue a public agency in Oregon up to $769,000, $769,200 for one person. So if one person's injured, they can sue you for that much. If you injure more than one person in the same incident, it's 1.538 million. Very odd numbers. They're redone every year, every July, but it's quite a bit of money. But you know what? It's not as much as you could get from like a Fred Meyer's or from a private corporation. So these limitations allow public agencies to not be sued for as much as other organizations would be. For property damage, it's only $126,200 that you can sue them for. $630,000 if you have multiple owners. An example for this is if a person's house was, let's say, had a massive sewer backup and they were the only owner, the most that they could get from that sewer agency or a city, if they were doing that, would be $126,200. And this is going back many, many years why this is there, but it's helped to limit the state or the kingdom back in the Old English days from being held accountable, because we are targets, and not being held accountable, but not being a target and being asked to pay for things well above what would be normal. So these are always increasing, always being changed, and always there. But when it comes down to it, why do you care? And the reason that you want to care about this is that you are a public servant. You guys are volunteers. You guys give all of your time. The employees are there as well. But you care because the Oregon Tort Claims Act, once again, is very specific in how it covers you if you're going to be underneath that umbrella. And my next slide kind of discusses this, and that your job is to, of course, govern the city and put it on its way as best you can. But when it comes to your personal liability and you and your family, you want to make sure as best you can you're underneath the umbrella when it's appropriate. And by that, I mean, so you have duties and responsibilities that you might do. Most agencies, have good insurance like you do, which is great. But some employees, some board members, council members, county commissioners, what have you, may not understand where that line is. And so let's talk about that. How can you be within the insurance coverage of the city? And how can you make sure that you're protecting yourself and know where that line is? So this is the actual wording from the policy, and it talks about member. So a member who is covered means the entity named on the declarations page, which is the city of Milwaukee, and officers, employees, agents, volunteers. Now, officers in this context is not police officers, it's you. employees or police officers. So how do you get coverage? How do employees, how do agents, volunteers? Well, here we go. All acting within the scope of their employment or duties, whether arising out of a governmental or proprietary function. I left that in there exactly because it talks about, once again, course and scope, direction and control. And really, this isn't a thing where this isn't a trap. What this is a way for you to understand that, wow, I need to be within these parameters in order to be covered by the city's insurance. Let's talk about the realities, however. This is the realities. And the reason that I created this training recently is because I've had a number of my customers. I'm a public entity agent, so I only have school districts and cities and counties and special districts, water, sewer, fire. That's all that I do, all I focus on. And I've seen a massive uptick over the years, especially in the last few months, of my customers, such as yourselves, who are being caught or sued or involved in litigation where they may or may not have coverage because of where the line is. Because there truly is two realities for you as a city councilor, a political reality and a legal reality. And you know this because you've been involved in this. I'm sure you read the paper like I do. But the political reality is, the responses that, you're approached in Fred Meyer's every day, maybe, and people complain to you, people call you up, people ask you questions, people say bad things about you. You want to defend yourself. We get all that stuff. The political reality is you're always on. You're always a city councilor, right? 24/7, 365. You're always there. Just as employees are always employees. But the legal reality is that you may or may not always be, of course, a board member protected by the insurance because, once again, course and scope, direction and control. And let's talk about that. So board members, city councilmen and women are only empowered during sanctioned board meetings where a quorum is present. That's it. That is when you are there, right? That's when you have the umbrella over you and what you do and say things, you do your work, you do great things, you make decisions, you give direction, you gavel things through, you discuss, you meet, and you're done. Before that meeting and after that meeting, you are Jeff Sinclair. You are just a normal John Q. Public, right? Or there's caveats to that. If the city council gives you direct duties, specific duties, committees, attend conferences, and I wrote this out specifically so you can see this, but basically anytime you might be an emissary, like, hey, will you please go to the Chamber of Commerce meeting and give them this message from the city council. That seems logical, right? But how many times are you questioned outside the meetings? Are you asked to do things outside the meetings? Are you approached outside the meetings, good and bad? And you're responding. You're trying to solve problems and help. Well, that's what I'm here to talk to you about if you do that and you're not being specifically granted those authorities via a vote in a city council meeting, you're not necessarily going to be considered a member. Therefore, you may not have coverage under the coverage document with CIS. Okay?
Can I ask a question really quick on that point? Because we have standing committee assignments that we all report to those meetings, and we've made it part of a list that we all sort of agree to, but we don't take a vote. What you just said just caught my attention. Yeah, our attendance isn't by way of a vote.
Yeah, to me, I would make that official, because what's going to happen is, in reality, is that something's going to happen. Let's say, I hope it doesn't, but knock on wood, if it does, then you're going to be brought into a lawsuit, and or the city will be. And after questions are asked and things are happening, you want to have a roadmap to success of finding coverage. You want to be able to hand the city, county insurance adjusters the roadmap of coverage. So giving them that we discussed and we decided via vote that we are doing X, Y, and Z, empowering individually or as a group to do these additional duties outside of our regular meetings. That just makes it much easier for them to get there. There is. Go ahead.
Sorry. Councilor, we'll add it to the next regular session so that you all can vote. Great question. Thanks.
Perfect. And by the way, this is totally interactive, so please interrupt me, go for it. This is all for you. So to kind of give you some ideas, because examples help. In my 24 years of claims and litigation experience, I've had every one of these issues come up with board members, okay, and counselors. So these are real stories, some of them multiple times, but these are real. So let's say that you're approached in Fred Meyer's by a friend demanding to help, with a storm drain. Jeff, I don't know what to do. My storm drain keeps clogging up, and you're at the city and you do this, or you're at the county, you do that. Whatever, you're at the school board, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. It's just you're approached as a board member because they know you're there and they're having a problem. This storm drain keeps backing up. I need help. Well, you know what? My name's Jeff Sinclair and I'm on the board, and I happen to have a small tractor, and you know what? I have a good heart and I want to help. So I go through there and I dig it up and I help clear it out, and lo and behold, great. Well, about 6 months go by and it fails and it sloughs off and it causes property damage and backups and all kinds of other stuff. And guess what? This person now sues the city. This person sues the city because we failed to do this right job. We did it wrong. We did things bad. We said, we don't have any record of doing this. We didn't do this. There's no maintenance records. We didn't know this was there. We just looked at it 9 months ago. It was fine. Or we were getting to it, whatever. In the end, when they sue them, the individual board member, council person with the big heart and the tractor and the time and the willingness to do it, they're brought into that lawsuit. They are now personally named in this because they did the work. They were the ones that caused this damage in the end, all because they had all the right intentions, but they didn't do what is best for the city, which is, please, if you're approached, and this happens more and more, that's why I'm bringing it up so much. When you're approached, of course, take the information down. We are helpers. You're not in your position unless you're a helper. You care. But I need you to think about this and say, oh my gosh, John, I totally understand what you're saying. I'm not the right person to deal with on this, but let me take your information down. Got your email right here, your phone number. Great. And it's what address? Okay, thank you so much. And then you email Ann or Bonnie or whoever at the city that would take these as part of your chain of command, and you copy that person, that homeowner, telling the story. I was approached at Fred Meyer's, happened, So you take it and then you hand it off. And please let them handle it. You can discuss it in a meeting if you like. If you want to do that kind of stuff, that much granular, I don't recommend it. That's up to you. But to me, as a city councilor, if you get stuck in that circle, that's just going to cause you personal problems potentially. So I would rather you take it with gusto and then deliver it to the staff. Does that make sense? Does that sound right? Good. I hope so. It's hard when it's a friend or it's a buddy or somebody who is just really needed help. I mean, this poor lady, I feel so bad for her. I can do it. Just be careful when you're doing that stuff. That's not a part of your role. The next one is the Facebook. I call it the Facebook to mess with my 13-year-old son. But anyways, so online stuff. This happens all the time. It just happened yesterday with another customer in another city. They were reading on Facebook unfair criticisms, and they responded. And they responded in their mind truthfully. It was honest, direct, it was there, and boom. And there might be a problem because they attached some documents and they attached some other things that may have some racial overtones, may have some LGBTQ overtones, all different kinds of stuff, because they felt that it was their role as a city councilor to do this. That is not a part of your job duties for this city that I know of. That would be unusual. So when you're doing that kind of stuff, realize that once again, politically, you're always on. And I get the feeling to do that. I'm not saying you can't. Just be aware, making any kind of response in that situation, you are completely on your own. That is very important. And it's so hard because it's misinformation, it's mean, it's all these bad things. But that is the hard part about what we're doing here every day. So please realize that would bring you outside of the umbrella. Versus, let's say the city has an online, person that handles this for their job, a communications person. That's their job. If that's their job, direction and control, course and scope, then that's different. They're under the umbrella if they do these kind of things, even if they make a mistake. So maybe that's how you get frustrated. You send Chris, hey Chris, whatever, or in this case, go through Ann as your main point of contact, of course, the city manager. The press calls you. The Oregonian, local papers, you name it. I live in Clackamas County, so I know these are always, it's a trap. Kyle Aboshi gives you a call. It's like, oh my gosh, I get it. Please have a plan personally about what you feel comfortable talking about. I would recommend that you push them to the person at the city who's in charge of press releases. Once again, you are John Q. Public other than those meetings, so do your best. It's hard, I get it. You can do it if you want, but that is what it is. And so I'm just trying to make sure you see the speed bumps before you have to drive over them.
That is literally part of our job. How can that possibly not be covered?
So if the city gives you the opportunity to and says, not city, if the city council says, you're the mouthpiece, Mark, at the Chamber of Commerce meeting, and you are to speak and talk about this. Now it could be different if that's your course and scope duties, but you have no protection for what you say or do outside of your course and scope of your duties. Period. None of us do. So what you think your duties might be, course and scope, if you're within those, with regard to the city, you're golden, you're great. But if it's not, if you're a city councilor outside of a board meeting, you haven't been granted the specific authority to go to a conference, to speak at the chamber, to visit the city county conference, whatever it might be, that is not an official duty of yours. It's a political reality, but not a legal reality. You want to talk about that a little more?
I want to change the laws if that's some kind of a law, because it's stupid.
Well, hold on. No, you don't. The risk here is that, one of us is quoted goes off on some horrible, like, hate-filled tangent, starts spouting lies and nonsense, and all of a sudden we're writing on Facebook, and we get sued for libel and slander and all kinds of other things. The city isn't on the hook to pay our lawyers' fees for that kind of behavior. So that's right. Am I wrong?
100% right. That is where, and you guys have, go ahead.
Well, and it's not even, doesn't have to rise to that level, right? It doesn't have to be hate-filled or bias or any of that. It can just be you get out ahead of a decision. There's something that's being decided about, a land use thing or a policy on SDCs or whatever, and you get out ahead of a council decision and you take a position that the council hasn't taken yet.
And that can be totally appropriate for you personally. If you choose to engage on Twitter, on Facebook, on Snapchat, on wherever, with anybody, you can do that. That's your First Amendment right. It just has to do with whether or not you're under the umbrella of the city. Okay, so that's duties and responsibilities. That's what I mean by that. So Mark, you're not wrong in you're like, what? No, politically, I get why you would do that and what purpose it serves, especially for good. But you have to realize that with that comes, if the city if you're not granted that authority via the people to do X, Y, and Z, and or the city council hasn't granted you that authority via committee membership or do this, go there specifically, you're speaking politically as a person until you're in the meeting itself.
Okay, so what you're saying is the Chamber of Commerce, for example, holds a State of the Cities every year. And the mayors of each of the cities in the North Clackamas area come and they are asked to speak, and then they're asked a bunch of questions. I don't go to council and get a vote of, can I go do this? The mayors are asked to do it, I do it. So if I say something in that venue that then somebody decides they're angry about and they're going to sue, the city doesn't cover that.
So Mark, I don't know this, but are you a paid mayor or are you a elected mayor?
If you call $300 a month paid, I am.
Okay. So within your duties as mayor, is this a part of your duty? Is this part of is this what the council says you will do and you do this? I mean, you have to try and inform it within your direction and control of the county, of the city, pardon me. And then, is it a part of that? If it fits within that, and that is it's the only reason you're there, you're required to be there, that type of stuff, that's fine. The thing that I would recommend you do, just personally, is have it be intentional. Have these things that you go to that are on behalf of the city that you are intentionally granted those powers, those authorities. That is, be intentional, be strategic about it. Because let's put it this way, just as what Councilor I can't see your name, I'm sorry. Is it Angel? Angel just mentioned, what if you all of a sudden just totally tubed the city at these things? So you know what? City council's crazy. I don't know what they're doing. I think one person's doing this, one person's doing that. It's just awful. is that your role to do those things? So that's why having a clean, clear idea of my role is X, I'm under the direction and control of the city doing this. This is my role and I'm doing that. And then get them to sign off on that and agree to that in general form. You don't have to get super, super technical, but when it comes down to this one example you just mentioned, I would have that on there. These are my mayoral duties. I'll be doing this, this, and this, and this. That's good, right? And then you decide that overtly, aggressively.
That's gonna be a long list. All right.
Yeah, and by the way, you can address this any way you want as a city council. You can say generally, Mayor, we're gonna grant you these authorities to do X, Y, and Z. It can be general, that's fine. I just want you to have a pathway that if things go wrong, knock on wood, unfortunately, that we can direct the adjusters to find that coverage to get you under the umbrella, if it makes sense. Okay. Good. This is perfect questions. Thank you. I had during elections getting more and more aggressive. Competitors mad at each other. One person stole signs and burned them and then asked for coverage. That doesn't make sense. That's not covered, of course. Those are examples you see. Auto damage, personal vehicle was, they pulled out using their personal vehicle and they were struck by somebody else. So it was their fault while they were driving to the annual city county conference. This is an interesting one because, the auto damage portion, I'm driving my personal vehicle and I'm driving to the conference that the city's allowed me to do, right? Which is great. And so I'm driving my vehicle and I screw up and then someone hits me. Okay. So I'm at fault. Well, the damage to your own personal vehicle, that is covered by you. That is not covered by the city because they don't insure that vehicle and you're paid mileage, which is for insurance and gas and that kind of stuff. So your vehicle damage is not covered by the city's insurance. However, your liability, because remember, course and scope, you were told to go and represent the city at this conference. Your liability from the time you leave for that conference and the time you get back, your liability is going to be part of that trip, if you will. Now, if you go to your sister's halfway there, 10 hours away, that's not okay. It's to the conference and back, but you're under the umbrella because you're there, but for your city council membership. Okay, does that sound appropriate? So there's one coverage that I always like to talk about because it's specific and it's important to understand in case you hear about this for other reasons. But the Oregon Governmental Ethics Commission, OGEC, it's kind of the watchdog for public entity board members such as yourself, council members as yourself. And so let's say that somebody complains that you did a executive session wrong. Let's say, you didn't do it right. You should have done X, Y, Z, you did it wrong. And they file a complaint. The OGEC is going to come to you and say, hey, listen, we've had a complaint. We want you to respond to this. The fine is $1,000 per, whatever. And you're like, whoa, we did this just fine. Well, if you give notice to city, county before you hire an attorney, if you allow them to help you approve the attorney that you choose and you prevail and you win, they will give you up to $7,500 in reimbursed funds to hire your attorney. Now, it's like, wow, that's interesting. Well, there's a lot of caveats there, right? All three of those things. One of those is the prevail. Now, what happens in a lot of these things is, let's say you actually do have a very small technical glitch. You didn't do something very small, right? And they come down from $1,000 down to $50. And you're like, you know what? $50. Okay, fine. Because I did technically do it wrong. I don't like it, but I get it, whatever. Moving on. You didn't prevail if you paid $50. So you have to be found innocent. I'm going to call it that. It's not criminal, but innocent in this case to get this money. Why this is here and why it's important to you is this is for people in your positions. You guys are targets. You guys are often picked on, pointed out, whatever. Sometimes we have people from the public that literally just start filing claim after claim after claim, administrative complaint, and just bombard you personally with these things. This is to help offset that because you are not doing anything wrong. You're a victim of somebody being malicious. And so that's what this is for, okay? And that's unusual. You don't find this in the commercial market. This is very, very specialized for people such as yourselves. Any questions on that? So volunteers, I want you to think about volunteers as unpaid employees. In other words, same thing, direction and control, course and scope. Be intentional. What are you approving them to do versus what's on your own just because you're a nice person? An example, let's say you're painting the city hall as a registered volunteer, we're going to have 5 volunteers paint the city hall or help out, and I drop a paint can on the head of a passerby. It's an accident, but this person's injured. Oh my goodness. They sue the volunteer, they sue the city. The volunteers, course and scope, direction and control, they're covered. Everything's fine, not for the person who's injured, but you know what I mean, okay? Another example is park bench is being painted by a Good Samaritan. This person is an angel. She is 77 years old. She's recently retired and she wants to keep going. And so she's going to paint all these park benches on her own, but she trips a person while the person's walking their dog. This person falls down and they come after her. She was not a volunteer. She was not under anybody's direction or control. She was just helping out. While we may love her and appreciate her and like what she's doing, unless we've got her, on some sort of plan or some sort of process, we know about it and we're controlling it, she will not be under the umbrella of that. So when it comes to volunteers, please be intentional about that so you can make sure that you want to cover those that you want to and not those that are just being Good Samaritans or otherwise out there. This one's tough because we don't want to push people away, but you do want to have control of them because they could do all kinds of funky stuff. Okay. Employees. So let's talk about this just generally, just so you can have an idea. This driving home from work and you strike a pedestrian in a sidewalk. Okay, first of all, this would be incredibly awful. But did they stop for drinks? So wait, well, who knows? But in this case, if you have an employee who's driving home from work to home, well, they're not at work anymore. So driving from work to home, that's on your time as an employee, not on the actual employer's time, the city's time. So that's interesting. Okay, so they'd be on their own insurance, wouldn't be part of us. Well, what if they're driving a city vehicle? What if they're given a city vehicle to take home? Changes everything. Whenever you allow city employees or volunteers to permissively use your vehicles, take them home, take them to a conference, whatever, that vehicle is covered by your insurance no matter what happens. If they have drinks, if they stop, if they go to their sister's house and Petaluma, California, whatever it is, you own that vehicle and those liabilities. So it's okay to let employees take vehicles home, and many cities do, many districts do, for all those different reasons. But just understand that vehicles and employees, you're going to own whatever they do. So having those good policies, procedures, which you guys work on, that's really important. So does that make sense? Go ahead, Counselor. You're on mute still.
So you have a policy that they can take, certain employees can take vehicles home. They take a vehicle home, but then they also go out after getting home and they drink and they have an accident and they're driving the city's car.
Yep.
Is that still the city's liability, even though they sort of made some intervening decisions?
Yes.
And did more than what they were sort of authorized to do by their use of the car?
Yeah, so there's 2 pathways. One is the HR pathway, human resources, and one is the legal pathway. You own the liability. If you allow someone to use the car permissively, take it home, then you're on whatever they choose, whatever decisions they make. Now, HR-wise, you can write them up, fire them, whatever, in a different way. But those are not together. Those are separate lanes. So you deal with one person by defending the city, defending them, that process, however ugly it is. I've had issues with, people who've murdered people, people who've done terrible things. And it's like, that's not awesome, but it is what it is. And another way is, no, this person's now because they drove drunk or the XYZ, it's a problem. A personal example, I was with not a vendor, but a different person politically that I know, and they had been drinking and I had not. And I dropped them home because they were too drunk to drive. And so I dropped them home and I went to a local Taco Bell because it was late night. I was hungry. I went home and guess who pulled up right behind me in his company vehicle? The guy I just dropped off because he was too drunk to drive. He was in his company vehicle. His company was on the liability insurance for that. He was not on that company vehicle for a long time because he was fired shortly after. But that's an example of you separate out the liability side, that the protection, the umbrella, versus the HR function, which would be a separate entity, separate issue. That's a great question because it doesn't why what when we choose to let people to have access to these things, whether it be a big lawnmower or a vac truck or whatever it is, we're entrusting them and we're protecting them. Course and scope, direction and control. is one thing when it comes to their duties, but when it comes to vehicles and other things like that, it's much, much broader. And the last thing, this is a little bit of a nuance, but it's important because we enter into a lot of contracts and we do a lot of things with vendors. We partner with others, sometimes renting a facility or using a vac truck, let's say, from the county, or renting a car from Avis even. Whenever we do that, we can be asked to, you can rent this vehicle from us or rent this, this location from us, but you must agree to defend us and hold us harmless, take care of anything that happens or arises out of this, right? We've all signed those contracts. We've all seen those contracts. That's very normal, especially as a property owner. You're going to protect yourself. I get that. And of course, the coverage that you have will follow that. So if you agree that we're going to rent this facility, and in return, if you let us rent it, the city will defend and indemnify you and hold you harmless and protect you if one of our visitors or one of our employees causes damage or causes a problem. We can do that, and your coverage will follow that. But the problem is that if you sign a contract saying that even when the party who we're renting it from, so the landlord, even if they're solely negligent, that's a problem. Because if they're solely negligent, let's say we rented this facility and the roof collapses because they didn't maintain it. We, as the renter, had nothing to do with that roof collapsing. We didn't do anything wrong. It's a sole negligence of somebody else. So that landlord would still be on the hook. City, county insurance, and no insurance that we have in the pooling programs would cover that. So it's just a thing for us to think about, that before we do business with certain people, make sure that we look at those contracts. And that's what we do with your staff a lot. Your city attorney does that a lot, of course, and Ann and Bonnie do that a lot. But that's just one little nuance that's there that's real important. So to me, this course or this class is really about, maybe unshare this, it's really about direction and control, course and scope. Truly, be intentional about this. In other words, when it comes to your duties as a council person, when it comes to volunteers, make sure you understand that your actions are personal versus city business. Because I don't want to ever have to tell you when it's the darkest hour that, you need to call your homeowner's insurance agent. I think the city is not going to be able to cover you on this. That would be bad if you didn't expect that, okay? So politically, you're always on. I get that. And that's a reality for us. I'm on boards as well. But when it comes to the legal liability, getting underneath that umbrella we talked about, make sure that you're intentional in meetings about what other aspects you have and what protections you can give yourself. What questions do you have? You got me? I'm here. Hopefully this isn't a downer. Hopefully it's like, oh, great, I should be careful here, know that. You can do whatever you like. Just know where the lines are. Put up those guardrails and protect yourself and your family. That's my concern. Is that it? Oh, yeah. Councilor Beatty?
So I will say, I did not know all this, and I am year 7 of being a counselor. So I thank you, and I thank Ann and Bonnie for bringing you. This is probably something that should be done every couple of years.
We just added it to the February 2023 council meeting, and we'll be doing it ongoing. So yes, yeah. I agree.
Yeah, and to be honest, this is a push that, because of my unique background of having to have those hard conversations in the worst times, I don't want to have those. So I'd rather be ahead of it, so we can have them, before you have to be called. That's just not fun. So I appreciate it. And Ann and Bonnie are so proactive. We meet often, and it's great to have staff that want to give you guys as much information as possible. And even if you choose to disregard or otherwise, it's just so you have that information. It's so important, because we all need to push forward and get things done, and we need all of us running on full speed. So I really appreciate your time.
So one of the things that the city has historically done, I mean, your talk about the volunteer and your example of the woman painting the bench, not being asked to do so by the city, that one really hit home for me, because, I do that kind of stuff, and I help people do that kind of stuff all the time that are unofficial work parties. One of the things the city does with the neighborhood associations is it covers like their annual picnic. And so it writes into their policy, I guess, at the beginning of every year or whatever. It surveys the neighborhoods about their concerts, their picnics, whatever. do we cover, or what do we need to do to cover, like, block parties, neighborhoods that want to have block parties and things like that? Yeah.
Those are separately insured. So I just wanted to make sure people know that that's not actually Jeff who insures those. We purchase a separate policy, and we do work with the NDAs to secure that list of events. And I do believe we actually wrote block parties into that a couple of years ago. So we wrote in a certain number of them so that up to that threshold of events, we had coverage. And I do not believe we've ever exceeded that threshold.
And I think the permit itself also has that information. The application for it includes, yeah. So even if you're not part of an NDA and you get a permit from the city, you're included.
Correct.
Good.
And that was at a couple of years ago, you all were talking about a desire to increase those types of events. So we included those as an option.
Well, and I could see potentially that this summer, after a year, after 15, 16 months of being cooped up, that more neighbors will want to have block parties than usual, Well,
and it's why the permit's really important. So it goes back to what Jeff was just saying. If we don't have it documented and we don't approve it as meeting the guidelines and stipulations that are covered under the liability insurance and something happens, then those homeowners could get really hurt. So the goal here, the reason for the paperwork, I know sometimes it seems like a lot, but the reason for the paperwork is to make sure that everybody is fully covered and that they're not ending up in a trouble spot if something happens.
Once again, leave those breadcrumbs for the claims adjusters to pay you. You want to give them the best avenue to yes. Yeah. That's what I would say. Get them to yes as best you can by just leaving the breadcrumbs of our intent was X. We documented it. Thank you very much for helping protect us.
So this is kind of jumping to a different topic, but a couple of years ago, there was a thing in the legislature to try and take away or to impose more liability for parks, for recreational.
Recreational immunity was challenged when a person slipped and tripped in a sprinkler in downtown Portland, correct? Okay,
well, and there was some bill or something. And so is all of that settled now?
Yeah, you do have recreational immunity. Actually, every person does, private or public landowner, as long as you don't charge. If someone's recreating on your property and they get injured, as long as you don't have like tiger pits and punchy sticks and traps, then you do have recreational immunity that you can apply to that. Yeah, that was a big deal in our world because of all the public entities that we support, because that's how we get a lot of stuff done. So that is back in play, but that was challenged a number of years ago. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Good question.
Jeff, I suspect that this is already in our orientation for new counselors, that there's some sort of coverage of this, but if there isn't, and there's a way to put together just a quick FAQ cheat sheet of this presentation, I think that would be really nice to have in there for new folks. It's great to have the presentation scheduled in advance for 2023, but repetition is always really useful.
Totally agree. And I think, Jeff, if you're able to do that, we do a binder for our new electeds, and we could include it.
Okay, we can talk about that. It's a little tricky because things do tweak here and there, but yeah, we can talk about that, absolutely.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Jeff.
Bye.
Mayor, you have language to read.
I do. I am trying to get to that. Come on. All right. After the work session, council will meet in executive session pursuant to Oregon Revised Statute ORS 192.6602D to conduct deliberations with persons designated by the governing body to carry on labor negotiations. With that, this meeting is adjourned. Do we have a separate login for that?
We do.
It was in your email and your calendar event in Outlook.